Two people with the same LDL cholesterol levels. One cruises through life while the other suddenly has a heart attack. How could that be? It turns out the usual cholesterol panel that we all do, and I just did one, it shows LDL-C and HDL-C triglycerides. They may miss a hidden risk. Two less talked about markers, ApoB and something called the ACSV, they might hold missing clues. And in this video, we're gonna break down what these markers are, why experts are paying attention, and what the science says about heart risk. Hi, I'm Gary B from HealthIQ by TheSwellScore. We're diving into two numbers you may not have on your standard blood test, ApoB and ACSV, and what they can tell you about your own heart. You've probably heard bad cholesterol and good cholesterol, and these are useful, but LDL isn't the whole story. Even if your LDL is normal, you might still have a lot of little cholesterol carrying particles lurking in your arteries. Well, that's where ApoB, the protein on each LDL particle, well, that's where that comes in. And ACSV, it's an emerging metric. It's related to the ApoC family and triglyceride-rich particles that researchers are now just beginning to explore. Well, we're going to look at what ApoB and what ACSV actually measure and why they may predict heart risk better than LDL alone, what recent studies say, and practical tips on what you can do to protect your heart health. Let's get started. All right, what are ApoB and ACSV? ApoB is a protein that sits on all of the atherogenic lipoproteins, and that means every single particle of LDL, VLDL, IDL, lipoprotein A has exactly one ApoB on its surface. In other words, ApoB is essentially a count of all of the bad cholesterol particles that's in your blood. Since each LDL particle carries one ApoB 100 protein, measuring ApoB tells us how many LDL particles there are. ApoB is not found on the good HDL particles, only on LDL and its relatives. So if your ApoB is actually high, it means you have a lot of cholesterol particles that can potentially clog the arteries. Some clinicians even use the ApoB test to get a more accurate picture of heart risk. At the Cleveland Clinic notes that measuring ApoB may predict cardiovascular risk better than a standard lipid panel. So what about ACSV? This is a less familiar marker. In research circles, it's sometimes used as shorthand for an apolipoprotein C base score. For example, ApoCV, or a composite risk index related to lipoprotein particles. It also reflects the number or composition of lipoprotein particles, especially those rich in triglycerides. Because ACSV isn't a routine lab test, data are still emerging, but it's generally tied to the ApoC family of proteins on VLDL. For instance, ApoC3, one member of this family, is well known to raise triglycerides and inflammations. Studies show high ApoC3 is an independent risk factor for heart disease. In people who have a genetic mutation that disables ApoC3, they end up with much lower triglycerides and dramatically reduced coronary heart disease risk. So even if we don't fully understand ACSV yet, we can say it's part of the same story. These are emerging markers that capture risk not seen by just LDL-C alone. So why ApoB and ACSV matter for heart risk? Well, traditionally doctors have used LDL cholesterol as the main measure of heart risk. That's why LDL is often called bad cholesterol. However, LDL-C is an imperfect predictor. Clinical trials and population studies have found that many people who develop heart disease had normal LDL-C levels. One reason is that LDL-C measures the amount of cholesterol in LDL particles, but not the number of particles. A bunch of small LDL particles can carry the same cholesterol as the newer, larger ones, yet they behave differently in your arteries. In fact, each LDL particle contains one ApoB, but LDL-C tests, they only measure the total cholesterol mass, not the particle count. This matters because more particles equal more opportunities to get stuck in your artery walls, and they can form plaque. Measuring ApoB directly captures the particle number. Research shows that ApoB is often a more accurate marker of risk than LDL-C. For example, in people with diabetes and metabolic syndrome or high triglycerides, LDL-C levels can look normal, even when ApoB is elevated. One recent study in 95,000 people, they found that an excess ApoB, the amount of ApoB above what LDL-C alone would predict, was dose-dependently linked to higher heart attack and cardiovascular disease risk across all the LDL levels. In other words, ApoB adds predictive power on top of LDL. The study authors concluded that ApoB provides important predictive value beyond LDL-C for heart disease. While another review notes that ApoB can identify raised numbers of small cholesterol-poor LDL particles that LDL-C actually misses, especially in people with high triglycerides, diabetes, or obesity. Okay, what about ACSV, ApoC-related markers? Well, specific studies on ACSV per se are sparse, and we know that the ApoC family plays a key role in atherogenic lipids. High triglycerides and remnant lipoproteins, which involve ApoC proteins, are themselves casual risk factors for heart disease. For example, ApoC3 inhibits the clearance of triglyceride-rich particles and even promotes inflammation in vessel walls. In practical terms, having a high ACSV score, if your doctor could get one, would likely mean that you have lots of these TG-rich particles. Since these particles can also deposit cholesterol in your arteries, ACSV could pick up risk that ApoB or LDL miss. To sum up, both ApoB and ApoC related markers are rising in importance because they reflect particle numbers and metabolism that traditional LDL-C does not fully capture. So how do these compare to traditional markers? Well, the key difference is what is being counted. LDL-C is a weight or amount of cholesterol inside the LDL particles. ApoB is literally a head count of these particles, one per particle. Non-HDL-C, that's the total cholesterol minus HDL, is closer to capturing all of the bad cholesterol, but it still measures cholesterol mass. Studies suggest that ApoB better correlates with artery clogging. For instance, in people on statins, LDL-C may drop a little bit while ApoB drops less, meaning residual particle risk remains. So experts often point out everyone knows LDL-C is important, but ApoB is like measuring the bullets instead of the gunpowder. Similarly, ACSV or ApoC markers tell you about triglyceride-rich particles like VLDL remnants that can also cause atherosclerosis. High triglycerides can mask heart risk, and that risk often comes from ApoB and ApoC containing particles. This is complicated, I know, but in fact, one perspective piece notes that half of patients with recurrent coronary events have normal standard lipids, and they may benefit from looking at the ApoB or similar markers. In short, while LDL-C remains a cornerstone and lowering LDL definitely does reduce the risk, ApoB and ApoC markers give us a finer picture, especially in people with diabetes, obesity, or other metabolic issues or a higher risk for coronary artery disease. Practical takeaways for your heart health. Get the right test. Talk to your doctor about an advanced lipid panel. An ApoB blood test is widely available now and may be covered by your insurance company. Some labs also report an ApoB and an ApoA1 ratio or other apolipoprotein measures. Even though ACSV isn't on routine tests yet, bringing up apolipoproteins or triglyceride-rich lipoproteins can guide a more complete assessment. If you have diabetes or metabolic syndrome or high triglyceride, an ApoB test is especially worthwhile. Understand your numbers. An elevated ApoB means you have many cholesterol particles, even if your LDL-C is normal. For example, if your ApoB is over 90 milligrams per deciliter, you might consider it high depending on guidelines because each particle drives plaque formation. A higher ApoB often means higher heart risk, similar to having a high LDL-C. If you ever get an ACSV or similar metric, see it as a red flag for too many triglyceride-rich particles. Focus on your lifestyle changes first. Lowering ApoB and related lipids is done with the same healthy habits that lower LDL. Eat heart-healthy diet, plenty of vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, and healthy fats, not saturated fat. Healthy fats like olive oil and nuts. Limit saturated fats like trans fats and excess sugar. Since ApoC related markers go up with triglycerides, cutting back on refined carbs and sugary drinks and alcohol, they can all help lower these risk levels. Regular exercise, 150 plus minutes per week of moderate activity, improves cholesterol particle size and number. Losing excess weight also lowers triglycerides and ApoB. Consider medical therapies if needed, and if lifestyle isn't isn't enough, or if numbers are very high, medications can also help. Statin drugs will lower LDL-C and ApoB, reducing the total number of particles. In people with high triglycerides, other treatments like fibrates or fish oil, omega-3s, they can help lower those remnants. New therapies specifically target ApoC3 or other apolipoproteins, for example, antisense drugs. They're mostly experimental now, but they're on the horizon. Always discuss these options with your doctor. Stay informed. Research in this area is active, and it's exciting right now. For instance, a 2024 expert analysis to confirm that targeting ApoB beyond just LDL-C, that can improve the risk assessment. As testing technology spreads, more clinics may start reporting ApoB and other apolipoproteins. Don't hesitate to ask your doctor or a lipid specialist what your results imply. Conclusion is, and the call to action in summary is, ApoB and related markers like ACSV, they're all in the new frontiers in understanding heart disease risk. They go beyond the classic LDL cholesterol numbers by counting the actual particles that can cause atherosclerosis. The latest science shows that ApoB in particular predicts heart attacks better than LDL-C alone. Well, that doesn't mean that LDL isn't important. Lowering LDL saves lives, but adding ApoB gives a clearer picture of the hidden risks. Next time you get blood work, you might ask, can we check for my ApoB? That could help catch problems early. As always, remember that prevention starts with lifestyle. Eat well, stay active, don't smoke, and work with your doctor on any necessary medications. If you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe to HealthIQ for more science-based heart and health tips. Leave a comment or question below if you have one, and check out TheSwellScore.com for vetted products. Stay heart healthy, and thank you for watching.